We should expand the Supreme Court to 50 justices and have the states appoint justices for a specific term, 6 or 8 years, with no right of reappointment. That one change would do more to ensure constitutional government. So do you see how broad and unlimited their limited Convention of States really is? There are no limits. They would have you believe there's limits, but there really aren't. Recently, they held a mock convention, a simulated convention in Williamsburg last year in 2016, the Convention of States, and they passed at that meeting 6 different amendments to the Constitution. So there's no end to the changes that they are proposing. It just goes on and on and on, and we have no idea what it will be. In the state of Nevada, when Mark Meckler, who is the president of Convention of States, came in testimony, and I was in the room, he said, he promised that Nevada can regain the control of 87% of our land, which is controlled by the federal government. Now, you have that same problem in Utah, but they don't control 87% here as much as we do. He said, we see that here in Nevada, we see that a majority of the state's land is owned by the federal government with no intention of their returning it to the state. You can have it returned through a constitutional convention. Oh, is there anything they haven't added to their Convention of States? But when he went to North Carolina, they had some different concerns, and those were the Second Amendment, Common Core, unemployment, and he recommended that they could get a marriage amendment. Now, I support a marriage amendment in our own state, which we passed by the people by a 70% vote. But marriage is not the purview of the federal government. That was always left in the hands of the states. So we see from their own words that there is no limitation on a Convention of States. And we would never know what proposals would be brought there or passed until it actually happened. Now, and so I think it's very important to keep that in mind. Now there's another issue I think we need to talk about. I think I left that, here it is, about Article 5. And one of the things that the Convention of States, Constitutional Convention of the States, always says, you don't need to worry if we pass all these amendments. They all have to go back to the states to be approved by 3/4 of the states. Isn't that what Article 5 says in the Constitution? Yes, it does say that. But let's read a little more in there. In the very last line of Article 5, where it's talking about what can be amended, it says the one thing that can't be amended in the Constitution. It says, no state without its consent shall be deprived of its equal suffrage in the Senate. What does that mean? It means every state gets 2 senators. That's what it means. And by amendment, they can't eliminate that without the consent of that particular state. So if they put in one thing that cannot be amended, what does that mean about everything else? The universe of amendments, it means that they're all open and that the Constitution can be amended in almost any way except that one thing. And what is one of the things that can be amended? Article 5. What is Article 5? Article 5 is the part of the Constitution that provides for the amendment process, isn't it? Yes, it is. Now, what happened in the original Constitutional Convention? We remember that they had a mandate to change the Articles of Confederation, and they went a lot farther than that, thankfully, that happened. And what happened to the amendment process? Do you remember? Under the Articles of Confederation, you had to have 13 states, all the states, unanimously approve any amendment. What did they do with the Constitution when they sent it out for ratification under the new rules, which they passed at the convention? They only needed 9 states, didn't they? Do you remember that? They actually changed the ratification process in the Constitutional Convention. Is that a possibility? That could happen in a convention of states if you can amend actually any part of the Constitution? I think it is a possibility. And so when they tell me that it's a safeguard that it has to go out to 34 states, I say, well, I hope it's a safeguard. But we haven't abided by most of the rest of the Constitution, so what would give you hope that they will abide by that part of the Constitution? So you see, there's another clever deception, because it's a possibility that they could actually change the amending process to 50+1, or whatever might be a convenient way in which to amend the Constitution. Now you remember, you all know the preamble of the Constitution, don't you? And does it say, we the delegates appointed by Congress from our states, appointed by our states to change the Articles of Confederation in order to form a more perfect union? No, what does it say? It says, we the people. So the way they got around the mandate from the Congress was that they went directly to the source of the power of government. And who was that? We the people. So that's how they circumvented the mandate from the Congress. And they were able to do it. So who's to say that when we have a second constitutional convention, which we've never had another one, that the same thing wouldn't happen? It's perfectly reasonable to assume it would. Now there's another deception that they use, and you need to remember this, and that is they often quote Justice Scalia in the 1970s. But when he was quoted just in 2014, I believe, he said, Scalia called it a horrible idea to hold a constitutional convention in this age of special interests. You never know what they are going to do. So they've deceived people again by using an old quote from Justice Scalia saying that it is possible that they can, that it's a horrible idea, the new quote. Now, what about their idea that every state will have one vote? Now, that's what they had in the original Constitutional Convention, wasn't it? However, from 1972 until about 1992, when they proposed congressional laws in order to deal with a constitutional convention, there wasn't a single one. There was 22 brought up in the House and 19 in the Senate. A couple of them passed in the Senate. Not a single one of those proposals suggested anything but proportional representation. What is proportional representation? That's like in the Congress, isn't it? California, New York, Texas, Florida, they have all the votes. And Utah, Nevada, Wyoming, Montana, we don't have many votes there, do we? Proportional legislation is like, but they recommended it like the Electoral College. Now, the Electoral College saved us this last presidential election, didn't it? It sure did. The wisdom of the founders. So that's their proposal. Like, it would have proportional representation like the Electoral College. But what does that still mean? The large population liberal states will have all the votes. And what does it say in Article 5? My stuff is falling down here, I'm sorry. It says in Article 5, when we read it, the Congress shall call the convention for proposing amendments after the states have applied. So Congress makes the rules. The Convention of States, with clever deception once again, would try to tell you that they make the rules. But there's already an established procedure in the U.S. Congress that Congress believes they will be calling the convention, as it says in Article 5, and they will be setting the rules. And I do not believe that California or New York or Texas or Florida are going to put up with having one vote for them and one vote for Utah. I just don't think it's reasonable to assume that that would ever happen. And anybody that's thinking that is pie in the sky. This is what this research on these previous bills was published by the Congressional Research Authority Service. And that's where it came from. And you can look it up just the same way that I did. Now, who else wants an Article 5 convention? Now, the Balanced Budget Amendment, as I said, currently has 28 states. That's because 4 states rescinded. I believe the Convention of States has 12. I think that's what they have. It might be 11. But the purpose of this is to increase our acceptance of a constitutional convention. Now, I thought your introduction was great because I thought, as I was thinking there, now, do any of you know anybody in your state legislature who you would consider to be equal to James Madison? Pretty discouraging, isn't it? When you look at those people and you think, well, we can't even control our city council or our county commission. What's going to happen with a constitutional convention when none of those delegates have to come back to face an election again? There is no way to hold them accountable. And so we need to know that once that convention goes into operation, that they will make their own rules. And that's what will happen. Now, there's a lot of people that have a lot of ideas about some different conventions. Mark Levin has 11 amendments that he wants. Governor Abbott has 9 from Texas that he wants. And of course, I've talked to you about all the ones that the Convention of States wants. So there's all kinds of amendments floating out there that they want. And you remember who the Supreme Court Justice was that recommended 6 amendments to the Constitution? That was former Supreme Court Justice John Paul Stevens. Let me give you a list of his amendments that he wants. Now remember, it's not just the conservatives that want a convention, is it? No. And why do conservatives so foolishly believe that they will control it? And what they've done, because what? Well, they are. They want to conserve the welfare state. But what they aren't is constitutionalists. I'm not a conservative, I'm a constitutionalist. So that's a difference. But let me talk about that a minute, about former Justice John Paul Stevens. And these are the kind of amendments we're also going to have. Abolishing the death penalty, taking away our individual right to keep and bear arms. Now that's the first one I think that'll go. And what did he recommend to do that? Just change it with 5 little words. And what are those 5 little words? When serving in the military. That takes away your individual right to keep and bear arms. And one of the other ones he wanted was limiting the First Amendment freedom of speech. And that would be by overturning the Supreme Court's decision in Citizens United. But groups such as Move to Amend have gone so far as to recommend that candidates are only able to spend money that the government gives them, not even their own money. Now, free speech, I'm here doing free speech, huh? But we had to pay for this room, and I had to pay for gas to get here. Is free speech free? I guess if you're a candidate, and I've been one several times, you can stand out on the corner and wave a sign and yell if you have no money for a campaign. Do you see how devastating these things could be? The most important kind of free speech is political free speech. Why? Because that's what keeps us free, to have political debate. And these are the things that are in jeopardy. Now, other groups such as Wolfpack have actually gone around and had several states like California and Vermont and others that have passed an amendment to repeal Citizens United, as well as limit what can be spent or done in a campaign. So don't ever think that money isn't free speech, because there's no way to have a campaign without money. And that's very important to remember. Now, let me just, is someone timing me? Okay, so the highest authority in the United States to ever speak out on a constitutional convention is former Chief Justice Warren Burger, who stated, and by the way, this is on the National Legal Forum website, in a letter to Phyllis Schlafly, I have also repeatedly given my opinion that there is no way to effective way to limit or muzzle the actions of a constitutional convention. The convention could make its own rule and set its own agenda. Congress might try to limit the convention to one amendment or one issue, but there is no way to assure that a convention would obey. After a convention is convened, it will be too late to stop the convention if we don't like the agenda. Now, what happened when we repealed the 17th Amendment? Many of you are familiar with the 17th Amendment. One of the recommendations of the Convention of States simulated convention was to reinstate the 17th Amendment. What did they realize the far-reaching effects of repealing the 17th Amendment when they did it, which would completely turn upside down the federalism that we have in this nation, the balance between the federal government and the state governments. That's why we have all these huge problems that we have today. And states have become just vassals of the federal government. They're not really states anymore. They're just an appendage of the federal government, implementing federal government plans through federal government money, which started out to be our money. And that's what happened. So do we have any idea, if they make all of these changes in our Constitution, what the far-reaching effects will be? Just like with the 17th Amendment that has turned out to be such a huge disaster in our nation and completely turning upside down federalism. No, we have no idea what the far-reaching effects of any of their well-meaning and good-sounding amendments will be. We just don't know. And so, as you look at the Convention of States, you have to realize that almost the whole thing is a clever deception, because none of it will limit anything that can be changed in the U.S. Constitution. And so we need to work, you need to work in Utah, just like we worked in Nevada. And I know you've done it many times before, but you need to all go